Hey y'all, I'm Lauren and welcome to Cantina Cast. Today I wanted to give y'all a sneak peek of the new High Republic release that's going to be coming out on April 4th. And the book is called Cataclysm and it's written by Lydia Kang, who she previously wrote a short story in the A Certain Point of View Empire Strikes Back edition. And this novel, it's going to be the next in line after Convergence, which was the first adult High Republic novel release of Phase 2. And then we had the Battle of Jeddah, which is like the midpoint in between those two, which is an audio drama by George Mann. And then after that, we have this book, which is Cataclysm. And this book, it is picking up right where we left off after the Battle of Jeddah. So we're following some of the same characters from Convergence, but it almost feels like we had Convergence and then we broke away for the Battle of Jeddah. And then now we're coming back to resume the story of Convergence in the aftermath of the Battle of Jeddah, if that makes sense. So if you're following Phase 2 of the High Republic, this book is pretty much going to be a must read. Otherwise, you're going to be missing a pretty big chunk of the story from Phase 2. So if you're following Phase 2 right now, then you're going to be familiar with some of the concepts and the characters that are coming up in this novel. So it's really going to be something that you pretty much have to read to be able to keep up with Phase 2. I'm going to talk about like some background context for this book, just so that way you're kind of aware of like where the story goes. But I'm not going to give any spoilers in this video. This is purely just a what you can expect type of video. So this book opens, I mean, we're talking like minutes after the Battle of Jeddah. Like we even see some of the characters finding out about the Battle of Jeddah. So we're not really covering a whole lot of time here, but we're covering a lot of things happening within a short span of time. That's why if you haven't listened to the audio drama or read the physical copy of the audio drama Battle of Jeddah by George Mann, you pretty much have to read that before this book. So make that a priority if you haven't read it yet, because I could totally see that if I tried to pick this book up after just reading Convergence, there's some references to the Battle of Jeddah that I don't know if I would get what they're talking about. Like, I feel like the author is expecting the reader to have some of that context already. And while there are some things that are like mentioned, kind of like reminding us, the book, it doesn't go like as much into detail as the audio drama did. So just make sure that you read that one first, and you're going to have like a way better reading experience if you do it in that order. So this novel, it is following the breakdown of the peace treaty signing that happened during the Battle of Jeddah audio drama. So we're pretty much looking at where are we going to go from here after that horrible breakdown took place. And the Jedi are investigating what exactly happened here, and they're starting to put it together that when the Battle of Jeddah happened, there was some outside interference that led to that going the way that it went. And all signs are pointing to the path of the open hand, which if you've been keeping up with Phase 2 of the High Republic, that's going to be no surprise. They pretty much seem to be behind a lot of things going on during this time period. And I will say that the Phase 2 High Republic comic by Cavan Scott, that also does give us some details about the path of the open hand's involvement as well. However, that one, it's not as crucial that you read it before this book. Like, if you want to wait until after this book to read it, that's totally fine. But I will say that that comic, it did give me a lot of good context for Phase 2 that I felt like I was needing. So read that comic at some point if you haven't yet, because it is just going to help with putting all of the pieces together. But it's not absolutely crucial that you read it before Cataclysm. Like, you'll be missing some details, but it's not going to be anything that's going to affect your understanding of the story as a whole. And so knowing all of that, we go into Cataclysm with the Jedi are trying to figure out what the path of the open hand is up to. How did this go so wrong on Jeddah? All of that kind of stuff. And so one of the big characters that we're following is Gela Natai, who you'll remember from Convergence. She was one of the protagonists in that story. And so we're following her as she's doing some deeper investigating. And when she's doing that, she does have to go talk to Axel Greylark as well to get some needed details that she suspects that he has. So we are getting to kind of see like what's going to become of the two of them in terms of where they left off at the end of Convergence. This story, it's addressing the story of those two characters while figuring out what's going to happen between Irem and Irino and how exactly the path is going to come into that. So that's kind of like the main gist of where we're going with this story. And I do want to take a second to talk about reading order. So if you've been following phase 2 of the High Republic, as I mentioned earlier, this novel, it's going to be a must read as part of that. But I want to talk about what I would suggest that you read before going into this novel. If you haven't read everything yet of phase 2, I expect that you'll be fine, but there are some things that I do think are really, really going to help you if you have read them. The reading order that I would suggest before going into Cataclysm is first reading Path of Deceit by Tessa Gratton and Justina Ireland. That's the first one that was released out of phase 2, and that one does lay a lot of the groundwork for who the Path of the Open Hand is and like what their goals are. Then after that, I recommend reading Convergence by Zoraida Cordova. This one is absolutely necessary to read before this book. You will have no idea what's going on if you don't read this book. Then after that, I recommend The Battle of Jeddah by George Mann. This is the one that was the audio drama. And this one as well, if you don't read this one, I don't really see how you would be able to follow a lot of the context that I feel like we need for Cataclysm. So I would highly, highly suggest at least having those 3 under your belt before you go into Cataclysm. There's other really great High Republic comics and novels from phase 2 that I definitely recommend getting to, but they aren't as key before this particular book. So that's kind of just like a very quick preview of what you can expect from Cataclysm. And I will be, once the novel is actually released, I'll be putting out one of my typical review videos where I give like my actual thoughts and opinions about the book and where I get into plot details and get further into what the story is doing. So make sure you're keeping an eye out for that video as well here on the Cantina Cast YouTube channel. But thanks so much for watching, y'all, and I hope y'all have a great rest of your day. Bye, guys.